The evening rush had just begun, and the soft murmur of voices mixed with the clinking of glasses inside the restaurant. The place was known for its elegant atmosphere, dim lights, smooth jazz music, and the smell of buttered garlic bread drifting from the kitchen. It was the kind of place where people came to feel important, to celebrate, or simply to show off that they could afford to eat there. Among the waiters and waitresses moving between tables, there was one young woman who seemed quieter than the rest. Her name was Lena. She wore the same black and white uniform as everyone else, her hair tied neatly back, her smile polite but tired. She had worked here for almost a year now, and though she did her job well, most people didn't really notice her. Lena didn't mind that much. She wasn't there to be noticed. She was there to earn enough money to pay her rent and take her evening music classes at the community center. Every night after her shift, she would walk home through the chilly streets, pull off her apron, and sit by her old keyboard, practicing songs until her fingers hurt. It wasn't much of a piano. Some keys stuck and a few sounded slightly off, but to her it was a small piece of happiness she refused to give up. Tonight, the restaurant was busier than usual. A group of wealthy regulars had reserved the large table near the stage. They were loud, confident, and the type who liked to laugh just a little too much. They often ordered the most expensive dishes and left the smallest tips. The staff dreaded serving them. Lena had been assigned to their table that night. "Good evening," she said softly as she approached, holding her notepad. "Would you like to start with something to drink?" One of the men looked her up and down before smirking. "Well, that depends," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Do you know the difference between a Merlot and a Malbec, sweetheart?" His friends chuckled, and Lena forced a small smile. "Yes, sir," she replied calmly. "Would you prefer red or white tonight?" They laughed again, not because she had said anything funny, but because they enjoyed the power of making someone feel small. Lena wrote down their order carefully, pretending not to hear the whispered comments that followed. When she turned to walk away, one of the women at the table muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, "She's cute, but she doesn't really look like she belongs here." The word stung, but Lena kept walking. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive moments like that was silence. Back in the kitchen, she set the order slip down and exhaled slowly. Her co-worker Daniel gave her a sympathetic look. "Those guys again?" She nodded. "Yeah, just another night." He shook his head. "You've got more patience than I ever will." Lena smiled faintly. You get used to it, but deep down she never really did. Every insult, every mocking laugh, every dismissive tone, she remembered all of it. She carried those moments quietly, letting them build a small fire inside her that she never showed anyone. The restaurant's background music played softly from the stage, a hired pianist performing smooth melodies while people ate. The man was older, with silver hair and a calm presence. Lena always liked his playing. Sometimes when she passed by the stage, she caught herself pausing for just a second, letting the music remind her why she loved the piano so much. Between orders, she glanced toward the stage again. The pianist met her eyes and gave her a small nod, as if he could sense she understood the music more deeply than most. Hours passed, and the noise in the dining room grew louder. The group at Lena's table had been drinking heavily now, laughing too hard, talking too loud. When Lena came back with another tray of glasses, one of the men suddenly waved his arm too widely, knocking a glass over. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading like ink. "Watch what you're doing," he barked at her instantly. Lena froze, realizing that from the angle it looked as if she had caused it. I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, grabbing napkins to clean it up. "Oh, she's sorry," another woman mocked in a sing-song voice. "That'll fix the stain, won't it?" The table burst into laughter again. Lena's face burned with embarrassment, but she kept her composure. She wiped the table carefully, her hand steady even though her heart was pounding. From the counter, Daniel saw the whole thing. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. When Lena brought the tray back to the kitchen, she set it down quietly and closed her eyes for a moment. "Hey," Daniel said softly. "Don't let them get to you." She shook her head. "It's fine. I just don't want to lose my job," he frowned. "You shouldn't have to take that." She gave a small shrug. "Maybe not. But some people only see what's in front of them. A uniform, a name tag. They never stop to wonder what's behind it. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then smiled sadly. You ever think about quitting? All the time, she admitted. But I can't yet. My piano lessons mean too much to me. They remind me that I'm not stuck here forever. The evening dragged on. As the crowd laughed, ate, and clinked their glasses, Lena worked quietly, moving from table to table with a soft grace that most people didn't notice. Her mind wandered sometimes to melodies she had been practicing at home, little tunes that helped her stay hopeful even when her day felt endless. Near the end of the night, the group called her over one last time. They ordered dessert and coffee, still making jokes under their breath. One of them leaned toward her as she poured his cup. You know, sweetheart, he said, his smile cold. Maybe if you learned to smile a bit more, you'd get better tips. The others laughed. Lena simply nodded. I'll keep that in mind, sir, she said, her voice steady. When she walked away, she could feel her hands trembling slightly. She set the coffee pot down on the counter and took a deep breath. The laughter behind her echoed like a bad song she couldn't turn off. But instead of anger, she felt something else, a quiet determination that surprised even her. When the restaurant finally began to empty, Lena wiped down the last few tables. The pianist was still playing softly, though the energy in the room had calmed. His music floated through the air like a goodbye. As Lena passed by the stage to collect some glasses, he looked up again. Rough night? He asked gently. She smiled wearily. You could say that, he nodded. You've got a calm way about you. That's rare. Most people would have snapped, she shrugged. It's easier to just keep going, he smiled knowingly. You play, don't you? Her eyes widened slightly. How did you? He chuckled. I can always tell. The way you listen. You don't just hear notes, you feel them. She hesitated, then nodded. I used to play more. Now it's just when I get time. Don't stop, he said softly, returning his hands to the keys. Music has a way of keeping you whole, even when the world tries to tear you down. Lena stood there for a moment, watching his fingers move gracefully across the piano. She wanted to tell him that she knew exactly what he meant, that every time she sat at her keyboard at home, she felt like herself again. But the words stayed in her throat. When her shift ended, she changed out of her uniform, tied her coat tighter around her shoulders, and stepped out into the cool night air. The streets were quiet now, the restaurant's glow fading behind her. She walked home slowly, her steps echoing on the pavement. As she reached her small apartment, she unlocked the door and went straight to her keyboard. It was old and scratched, one leg held up by a stack of books, but when she sat down, it felt like the world melted away. Her fingers touched the keys softly at first, then more confidently. The melody that came out was the same one the pianist had been playing earlier, but soon she added her own touch, something more alive, more her. In that small, dimly lit room, the quiet waitress became someone else entirely. The music filled the space with warmth, and the smile that spread across her face was real. Not the polite one she wore at work. She didn't know it yet. But soon the world would hear her play, not in this little room, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever looked past her. For now, though she played until the city outside went silent, until her heart felt lighter, and until she believed again that maybe, just maybe, she was meant for something more. The next evening came faster than Lena expected. The restaurant looked almost the same as it always did. The same warm lights, the same smell of roasted herbs drifting from the kitchen. But there was something different about the energy. It was Friday night, the busiest night of the week, when the tables filled quickly and every corner buzzed with chatter. Lena tied her apron neatly and checked her section. She had slept very little the night before. Her fingers still ached from practicing on her keyboard, but even through her tiredness, she felt a quiet comfort. Playing always gave her that, even after a long day. Big crowd tonight, Daniel said as he carried a tray of glasses past her. Hope you're ready. I'm always ready, Lena said with a small smile. He grinned. That's what I like about you. You never lose your cool, she laughed softly. I just fake it well. The restaurant filled up quickly. The piano sat near the corner, polished and ready. The regular pianist, Mr. Conway, usually arrived early, always dressed in a neat suit with his small bag of sheet music. But tonight the piano stool was still empty. Has anyone seen Mr. Conway? One of the waiters asked. Lena glanced at the clock. He was usually there by now, warming up. A faint worry passed through her. 10 minutes later, the restaurant manager, a serious man with thinning hair, walked out from his office frowning. "Mr. Conway just called in," he announced quietly to the staff. "He's been taken to the hospital. Nothing too serious, but he won't make it tonight." The news spread quickly, and for a moment the rhythm of the night broke. Everyone knew how much the restaurant depended on the live piano music on Fridays. It wasn't just background noise, it was part of the experience, part of what the guests expected when they paid for expensive meals. "What are we going to do?" one of the servers whispered. The manager rubbed his forehead. "We'll just have to play the recorded music for tonight." But the sound system was small and never loud enough. And when he turned it on, the speakers gave a soft crackle followed by faint static. The atmosphere instantly felt duller. People started to notice. From across the room, one of the regulars raised his voice. "Hey, what happened to the live music?" The manager walked over, trying to smile. "Our pianist had an emergency, sir." Then find someone else," the man interrupted. "We're paying for a full experience here, not radio music." Lena stood near the counter, watching the scene unfold. The same group from the night before was sitting at their usual table again, already halfway through a bottle of wine. They looked restless, clearly ready to complain about something. The manager came back, muttering to himself. "If I could play the piano, I'd do it myself." Lena hesitated. Her heart beat faster. The idea came before she could stop it. She took a breath and walked toward him quietly. "Sir," she said softly, "I know it's not the same, but I can play a little, maybe just until you find someone." He blinked at her, surprised. "You can play piano?" "Yes," she said quickly. "I've been learning for years. I can try something simple just to keep the mood." The manager looked unsure. "You? But you're on shift." "I can play during the breaks between serving tables," she said. "If it doesn't work, you can stop me." He crossed his arms, glancing around the crowded room. The noise level was rising. Customers were starting to talk louder, growing impatient. "Fine," he said finally. "But don't make a scene. Just keep it calm and nice." "Got it?" Lena nodded. Her palms were already sweating. The piano sat in the corner, gleaming under the soft light. She had walked past it 1,000 times, but had never imagined sitting there in front of all these people. Her heart thudded in her chest as she wiped her hands on her apron and approached it slowly. As she pulled out the stool, a few heads turned. Someone whispered, "Is the waitress going to play?" The group of loud regulars laughed quietly. "Oh, this should be fun," one of them muttered. Lena pretended not to hear. She sat down, her fingers hovering above the keys. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. The soft buzz of voices around her faded until there was only silence and the faint hum of the lights above. She pressed a single key, middle C. The sound was clear and pure. Then she began to play a gentle melody, one she had practiced countless times at home. It wasn't flashy, just simple and honest. At first, people kept talking, clinking their glasses and murmuring to each other. But as the tune continued, something began to shift. The melody flowed like calm water, smooth and delicate. The notes rose and fell softly, wrapping around the room like a warm breeze. Gradually, the chatter slowed. A few people turned to look. The manager, standing near the counter, crossed his arms again, but this time his expression softened. Lena's hands moved more confidently now. Her body relaxed. She forgot about the uniform, the sneers, the spilled wine, and the long shifts. For the first time, she wasn't the waitress. She was herself, just a girl who loved music more than anything. When she reached the final note, the restaurant was completely silent. Then came a soft ripple of applause. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was real. The group that had laughed earlier clapped slowly, half out of surprise, half out of awkwardness. One of the women whispered something, and the others nodded, watching Lena curiously. Lena gave a small nod, stood up, and returned to her section quietly. Her cheeks were warm, but her heart felt lighter. Daniel passed by and whispered, "You didn't tell me you could play like that?" She smiled shyly. "I didn't think it mattered." "Mattered?" he said, shaking his head. "You just saved the whole night." But it wasn't over yet. After 20 minutes, the manager approached her again. "The customers are asking for another song," he said, almost hesitant. "Do you know anything a bit more upbeat?" Lena blinked. "I think so." "Then go ahead," he said. "Just keep an eye on your tables afterward." She nodded and returned to the piano. The crowd quieted again as she sat down. This time she played something livelier, a cheerful jazz piece she had learned months ago but never played for anyone. The rhythm was smooth, full of tiny flourishes that made it sparkle. Soon the energy in the restaurant changed completely. People started tapping their fingers against their glasses, smiling. One man began humming softly along with the tune. Even the kitchen staff peeked out to listen. Lena felt a rush of joy as she played. It was as if her fingers were dancing, her heart moving with every note. The fear that had once held her back was gone. She didn't care who watched now. When she finished, the applause was louder this time. People smiled at her as she stood, and one of the guests even raised his glass toward her. The manager approached again, looking both stunned and proud. "That was unexpected," he said with a grin. "I think you just became our entertainment for the night." Lena laughed softly. "Are you sure? I still have tables to serve." "Don't worry about that," he said. "We'll manage. Just keep playing. They love it." For the rest of the evening, Lena played in intervals. Between serving dishes and refilling drinks, she returned to the piano and filled the air with melodies that made people smile. The restaurant, which had once felt heavy with noise and tension, now glowed with warmth. Even the group that had mocked her before sat quietly now. At one point, one of the men raised his hand to call her over. When she walked to their table, she expected another cruel remark, but instead, he said quietly, "That was beautiful. Didn't know you had that in you." Lena gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you, sir." The woman beside him looked down, avoiding her eyes. "You play very well," she added softly. Lena nodded again and walked away, her steps light. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, but for the right reasons. As the night drew to a close, she played one last song, a slow, tender tune that seemed to capture everything she had felt in the past year. The exhaustion, the hope, the quiet strength she never gave herself credit for. The last note lingered in the air long after her fingers left the keys. When the final customer stood to leave, several stopped by the piano to thank her personally. Even the manager, who was usually strict and businesslike, smiled as he locked the door behind the last guest. "You did something special tonight, Lena," he said. "You reminded everyone that there's more heart in this place than just fine food." She smiled softly. "I'm just glad I could help." As she walked home that night, the cool air brushed against her cheeks. She could still feel the echo of the keys beneath her fingers, still hear the applause in her mind. For the first time, she wasn't just dreaming about playing for others, she had actually done it. And though she didn't know what it meant for her future, she knew one thing clearly, that music, her quiet refuge, had just opened a door she never expected. She looked up at the night sky, a faint smile touching her lips. "Maybe this is only the beginning," she whispered. Then she walked on, the sound of her own footsteps mixing with a rhythm only she could hear, steady, hopeful, and alive. The next few days passed like a blur for Lena. She had gone to work expecting another long shift, but now everything felt different. The night she played the piano had changed the way people looked at her. Customers smiled at her when she walked by, and even her co-workers treated her with a kind of quiet admiration. Daniel teased her that morning as they prepared the tables. "You realize you're basically a celebrity now, right?" She laughed softly. "Hardly. I just filled in for a night." "Yeah, but the way you played," he said, shaking his head. "People are still talking about it. The manager said a couple of customers called today just to ask if the Waitress pianist would be performing again." Lena blushed. "They actually said that?" He nodded. Word for word. She didn't know whether to feel proud or nervous. Part of her was thrilled that people appreciated her music. Another part felt shy about being the center of attention. All she ever wanted was to play, not to be noticed. That evening, when she walked into the restaurant, the manager greeted her differently. "Evening, Lena," he said, his tone warmer than usual. "We're doing something new tonight. I want you to play during the dinner rush. You'll still handle a few tables, but music will be your main focus. You okay with that?" She hesitated, looking around. "Are you sure? What if people don't like it this time?" He smiled. "After the way they reacted last week? Trust me, they'll like it, and just like that." The waitress, who once blended into the background, now had a place on the small stage beside the grand piano. As the lights dimmed and the evening crowd poured in, Lena felt her nerves return. The piano sat under the warm glow of the chandelier, waiting for her. Her heart raced as she adjusted the stool. The first few minutes were quiet, people chatting, waiters rushing, glasses clinking. Then she began to play. Her fingers touched the keys gently, the first few notes flowing into a graceful melody. It was a song she had written herself one night after work, a tune she had never shared with anyone. It started soft like a whisper, and slowly built into something rich and emotional. At first, no one seemed to notice. Then, one by one, conversations began to fade. Forks paused mid-air, heads turned toward the sound. The rhythm filled every corner of the room. It wasn't loud, but it had something that pulled people in, a mix of sorrow and hope, the kind of feeling that reminded you of something you couldn't quite name. Lena forgot where she was. She forgot about the tables, the customers, the long hours. She only felt the keys beneath her hands and the music that had lived inside her for so long. Her body moved naturally with the rhythm, her expression calm but alive. When she reached the final note, the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then the applause came, soft at first, then louder, spreading from table to table. Lena looked up, startled. Some people were even standing, clapping with genuine joy. The sound of it made her chest tighten. She smiled shyly, gave a small nod, and stepped away from the piano. As she walked toward the counter, Daniel grinned from ear to ear. "You just turned this place into a concert hall," he said. The manager patted her shoulder. "I told you. You've got something special, Lena." She smiled, unsure what to say. But the biggest surprise came when the same group from the week before approached her table. The man who had mocked her now looked awkward, his confidence replaced by discomfort. "Miss," he said, clearing his throat, "I wanted to apologize for the other night. We were out of line." Lena blinked, caught off guard. "It's all right, sir. Thank you." "No, really," the woman beside him added. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in a long time." Lena smiled softly. "I appreciate that." When they walked away, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The sting of humiliation from that night no longer hurt. The music had spoken louder than any insult could. The rest of the evening went smoothly. The restaurant felt different now, alive with warmth and laughter. Even people who usually came just for the food stayed longer, sipping their drinks as if they didn't want to leave. At one point, a little girl from one of the tables ran up to Lena shyly and handed her a folded napkin. Inside was a crayon drawing of a piano with the words, "You play pretty." Lena smiled, her eyes softening. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said as the girl's mother watched from a distance, smiling too. By the time her shift ended, Lena felt lighter than she had in months. She changed out of her apron, took one last look at the empty restaurant, and walked home beneath the quiet streetlights. That night, when she sat down at her old keyboard, she didn't practice scales or old songs. Instead, she began to compose something new, something inspired by the night's joy, by the sound of applause, and by the feeling of being truly seen for the first time. Days turned into weeks, and every Friday became Lena's night. People came not just for dinner, but to hear her play. Some regulars even brought their friends, saying, "You have to listen to the girl at the piano." The restaurant started earning more than ever. The manager was thrilled, the staff was proud, and Lena, she was happy. One evening, a man in a dark suit approached her after she finished a song. He had kind eyes and carried a small notebook. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm with a local arts magazine. We feature hidden talents, people who bring something special to the community. Would you be open to an interview?" Lena's mouth fell open slightly. "An interview?" "Me?" he smiled. "Yes, you. Everyone's talking about your performances here. We'd love to share your story." She hesitated, unsure. "I'm just a waitress who likes to play music." "That's exactly what makes it worth telling," he said kindly. The next week, the article was published online with the headline, "From Waitress to Wonder, the night music found its voice." It was a short story about how Lena had filled in when the pianist got sick and ended up transforming the entire atmosphere of the restaurant. The piece included a few photos, one of her sitting at the piano, smiling shyly, her fingers resting on the keys. Within days, people started visiting the restaurant because of that article. Some came just to listen to her. Others left small notes of encouragement on their bills, saying things like, "Keep playing, you're amazing," or "Your music made my night." Lena's life began to change in quiet but meaningful ways. Her confidence grew. She spoke more, smiled more, and carried herself differently. Even when she served tables, people looked at her not as just a waitress, but as someone with a gift. One night, after another successful performance, the manager approached her with a thoughtful look. "Lena, there's something I want to ask," he said. "A local charity is hosting a gala next month, and they're looking for a musician. I told them about you, and they'd love for you to play." Her eyes widened. "A gala? For real?" He nodded. "It's a big event. Fancy people, important guests. I think you should do it. It's a good opportunity." She hesitated, her stomach fluttering. "I don't know. I've never played anywhere like that." "You'll do fine," he said, smiling. "You've got something they don't teach in music schools. Heart. That's what people remember." The night of the gala, Lena stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly. The hall was grand, filled with elegant decorations and softly glowing lights. She could hear the crowd murmuring, waiting for the performance to begin. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. "Just like the restaurant," she told herself. "Just play for them the way you play for yourself." When she stepped out onto the stage, the lights felt blinding at first. She sat down at the piano, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her. Then she began to play. The first note rang out like a heartbeat, steady, clear, full of life. As the melody unfolded, the room changed. The noise faded, replaced by silence so deep it felt sacred. The music moved through her fingers like it had been waiting for this moment all along. When the final note faded, the crowd rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous. Lena stood, her heart full, and bowed. Tears glimmered in her eyes, though she didn't know whether they were from relief, joy, or disbelief. That night, as she walked home under the stars, she thought about everything that had led her here. The long shifts, the cruel laughter, the quiet hours at her keyboard. Every small struggle had carried her to this moment, and though she didn't know what would come next, she knew this. She would never hide her music again. The same hands that once carried trays now carried dreams, and the world was finally listening. The night of the gala stayed with Lena for days. Even when she returned to the restaurant, the applause still echoed in her mind. It felt unreal that people who didn't even know her name had stood up and clapped just for her. The manager greeted her with a wide smile the next morning. "You made us proud," he said, handing her a newspaper folded neatly. Right there on one of the local pages was a picture of her at the piano. The headline read, "Waitress wows gala guests with unforgettable performance." Lena stared at it, speechless. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. "You're famous now," he joked, but there was real admiration in his voice. She shook her head with a shy smile. "I'm not famous. I just got lucky." But luck wasn't the right word. Everyone around her knew it. What she had wasn't luck. It was talent, the kind that came from years of quiet dedication. That evening, when she walked into the restaurant, customers clapped softly as she entered. Someone even called out, "Play us something tonight, Lena." She laughed and waved. After dinner, maybe. The energy in the place had changed. What was once just a restaurant now felt like a family gathering. People weren't just there to eat. They came to feel something. That night, when Lena began to play, the crowd fell silent almost instantly. She played a soft, emotional tune, the kind that made people remember old memories. Some couples held hands across their tables. Others just closed their eyes and listened. Halfway through the song, she looked up and noticed something that made her chest tighten. Sitting near the back of the restaurant was the same group who had mocked her the night she spilled the wine. They were quieter this time. No loud laughter, no arrogance, just quiet attention. When she finished, one of them stood and began to clap first. The others followed. It wasn't the forced, polite kind of applause. It was sincere. Later, when she walked past their table, the same man who had ridiculed her before stopped her gently. "We never got to say thank you properly," he said. "You made this place come alive again." Lena smiled softly. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," he nodded. "We did, truly." As she walked away, she felt something deep shift inside her. The memory of that painful night no longer hurt. It had turned into something beautiful. Over the next few weeks, more people began visiting the restaurant. Some came because they had read about her in the paper. Others had heard stories from friends. On weekends, the place was packed. The sound of her music drifted through the air like a promise, turning every evening into a small celebration. One night, after another performance, an elderly woman approached her. She wore a long coat and carried a worn-out purse. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "My husband used to play piano," she said softly. "He passed away last year. When you played that song just now, it felt like he was sitting beside me again. Thank you." Lena felt her throat tighten. She reached out and gently touched the woman's hand. "Thank you for telling me that," she whispered. "I'm really glad it meant something to you." After the woman left, Lena sat at the piano for a few minutes longer, staring at the keys. She realized then that music wasn't just sound, it was connection. It was the invisible bridge that joined people, even strangers, through feelings they couldn't put into words. By the next month, Lena's name had become something of a quiet legend in town. Small cafes and event planners began calling the restaurant, asking if she'd be available to play for their gatherings. She never turned them down, not because of the money, but because every time she played somewhere new, she met someone whose heart was touched by it. One weekend, she was invited to perform at a community fundraiser. It wasn't fancy, just a small event at a local park, but the crowd was full of families, children running around, and people laughing. When she sat down to play under the open sky, the sound of her music blended with the wind and the rustle of trees. A little boy sitting near the front watched her with wide eyes. After she finished, he ran up and asked, "How did you learn to do that?" She smiled. "I practiced every day, even when no one listened." He nodded thoughtfully. "I want to play like you someday." "You can," she said gently. "Just never give up." That moment stayed with her all evening. She had once been that kid, dreaming, waiting, hoping someone would tell her it was possible. Now she was the one giving that hope. At the restaurant, the manager began promoting piano nights every Friday and Saturday. People lined up outside before the doors even opened. Some of the regulars said they came not just for the food, but because Lena's music helped them forget their worries for a while. One night after her last song, a man in a suit approached her again. This one looked different from the magazine writer before. He had a sharp look in his eyes, like someone who noticed details others missed. "Miss Lena," he said, handing her a business card. "I'm a music producer from a small label downtown. I heard about you and decided to see for myself." She blinked in surprise. "Oh, I didn't expect that." "You've got real talent," he said simply. "Raw, honest talent. I'd love to help you record a few tracks. Nothing big at first, just something to share online. The world needs to hear you." Lena hesitated, the card trembling slightly in her hand. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that." He smiled. "You're more ready than you think." That night, she couldn't sleep. The idea of recording her own music felt like a dream she'd never dared to imagine. She sat at her keyboard in her tiny apartment, staring at the keys that had carried her through so much. Her fingers began to move on their own, playing softly in the dark. Each note was a memory: the laughter, the pain, the long nights working, double shifts, the applause, the faces of strangers who had found comfort in her songs. The next day, she told the manager about the offer. He listened carefully, then nodded with pride. "You have to do it," he said. "This is your moment. We'll always have a place for you here, but the world out there deserves to know you too." Daniel grinned from across the counter. "Just promise us you won't forget the little people when you're famous." She laughed. "I could never forget this place." The following weeks were filled with new experiences: studio sessions, learning how to record properly, choosing which songs to play. The producer was kind and patient, encouraging her every step of the way. When her first track was uploaded online, she didn't expect much, but within days, it spread quickly. Comments poured in, people from other cities, even other countries, writing things like, "Her music makes me feel calm, and I cried listening to this." The restaurant hung a small photo of her near the entrance with a note that read, "Our very own Lena, once our waitress, now our star." Every time she walked past it, she smiled quietly, not out of pride, but gratitude. One evening, after her last recording session, she stopped by the restaurant just to visit. The place was busy, full of laughter and light. The piano sat quietly in its corner, polished and waiting. The manager spotted her and waved. "Look who's back," he called out. The customers clapped when they saw her. Someone shouted, "Play one more song." She laughed, walking to the piano. "All right, just one." As she began to play, everything else faded away. The studio lights, the noise, the attention. It was just her and the piano again, like the very first time. When she finished, the room filled with applause once more. But this time, Lena didn't just hear it. She felt it. It wasn't for fame or success. It was for the journey, for the person she had become. As she stood and looked around, her eyes landed on the group that had once mocked her. They smiled and clapped the loudest. One of them raised his glass to her, a quiet gesture of respect that said more than words ever could. Lena smiled back. When she left that night, the city lights reflected softly in the rain. She thought about how far she had come, how music had turned her pain into purpose. And though she still worked hard, still lived simply, she carried something precious inside her. Proof that kindness, patience, and courage could turn even the smallest life into something extraordinary. The world had sneered once. Now, it listened. And Lena, the once quiet waitress, walked into the night with her head held high, ready for whatever song life would bring next. Months had passed since Lena's first song went online, but the excitement never really faded. People kept sharing her music, posting videos from her restaurant performances and leaving kind comments that she sometimes read late at night before going to sleep. She still worked at the restaurant a few days each week, not because she needed to, but because it felt like home. Every time she walked in, she was greeted like family. The regulars smiled, the cooks waved, and the piano in the corner almost seemed to wait for her fingers. One evening, she arrived early before the dinner rush. The restaurant was quiet, filled with the warm smell of fresh bread and roasted herbs. She sat at her usual table with a notebook in front of her. Inside were pages of lyrics and melodies she had been working on. She wasn't writing for fame or an album. She was writing because that was how she spoke best. Daniel came by with 2 cups of coffee and set one down in front of her. "You've been staring at that page for 10 minutes, he said with a grin. "I'm trying to finish a song," she replied softly. "But the ending doesn't feel right." He shrugged. "Maybe it's not supposed to end yet." She laughed. "Maybe you're right." The doors opened then, and the first few customers began to walk in. A young couple, a group of friends, an older man with a cane, ordinary people, the kind she loved to play for. Later that night, when the dining room was full and voices filled the air, Lena began to play. The first few notes drifted softly like a whisper turning into a story. She didn't even look at the sheet music anymore. Every note came from memory, from emotion. Her fingers moved lightly over the keys, but there was strength in them too. It was the strength of someone who had fallen and gotten back up, again and again. When she finished, there was silence. Then, as always, the sound of hands clapping filled the air. She stood and bowed slightly, her cheeks flushed, but her smile gentle. After the performance, the manager came over, still smiling from ear to ear. "There's someone here to see you," he said, nodding toward the bar. Lena turned and saw a young woman standing there holding a folder and looking nervous. "Hi," the woman said when Lena approached. "My name's Clara. I'm a music teacher at the community center downtown. I've been following your story for months now. You've inspired a lot of our students." Lena blinked, surprised. "Really?" Clara nodded quickly. "Yes. Some of them come from difficult homes. They think dreams like yours are impossible, but after we showed them your videos, they started believing again. Would you come visit the center sometime? Maybe play something for them? Or talk about your journey?" Lena hesitated only a second before smiling. "I'd love to." The following week, she visited the center. The room was small and a bit worn down, but it was full of life. Children sat on old chairs and plastic stools, clutching second-hand instruments and notebooks. Their eyes lit up when she walked in. One boy whispered loudly, "That's her? That's the piano lady from the video." Lena laughed softly. "Hi, everyone. I'm Lena. I used to work in a restaurant, just like any other job. And one night, everything changed because I played a song." They listened closely as she told her story, how people had mocked her, how she had nearly given up, and how one chance moment had turned everything around. When she sat at the old upright piano and began to play, the room went silent except for the sound of her music. When she finished, there were tears in some of the children's eyes. One girl raised her hand timidly. "Were you ever scared? Like, that you'd fail?" "All the time," Lena admitted with a soft smile. "But I learned something important. Sometimes you don't need everyone to believe in you. You just need one person, and sometimes that person is you." The girl nodded, wiping her eyes. After that day, Lena started visiting the center every month. She helped the kids write simple songs, encouraged them to perform for one another, and reminded them that music didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be honest. Her fame slowly grew, but she never chased it. She turned down offers that didn't feel right, preferring to stay connected to the people who truly appreciated her art. Then one evening, she received an invitation that made her pause. It was for a charity concert, a national event where musicians from all over the country would perform to raise funds for children's education. The letter specifically asked for her to play the closing piece. Her hands trembled as she held the envelope. The little waitress who once spilled water on a rude customer was now being asked to close a show seen by millions. She accepted. The night of the concert was like nothing she had ever experienced. The stage lights were blinding, the crowd massive. Musicians and singers she had only ever seen on TV stood backstage with her, smiling politely. When it was finally her turn, she walked slowly to the grand piano set in the center of the stage. The lights dimmed, the crowd quieted. She took a deep breath, remembering the restaurant, the first night she played for a small crowd that had laughed at her, and how the room had fallen silent when she began. She touched the keys. The first note echoed like a whisper in a vast space, then another and another. The melody grew into a wave of sound that rolled across the hall, gentle but powerful. She played with her whole heart, her soul in every note. She thought about all the faces she'd seen over the years, the kind people, the cruel ones, the children who believed again. Every note was a piece of them. When the last chord faded, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then the audience stood up all at once, clapping and cheering until she felt tears on her cheeks. That night, as she stepped off the stage, the same producer who had discovered her years ago met her backstage. "You did it," he said quietly. She smiled through her tears. "We did." In the months that followed, Lena continued to play, but she also began something new. With the help of the community center, she started a small foundation that provided free instruments and lessons to kids who couldn't afford them. She called it Keys of Hope. Every time a child received their first piano or guitar, Lena remembered the girl who once practiced alone in a quiet apartment, wondering if she would ever be good enough. Years went by, and though her career grew, she always returned to the same restaurant. The piano was still there, now with a small plaque that read, "The night music changed everything." Sometimes she'd sit and play just for herself, long after the guests had gone home. The notes would float softly in the empty room, warm and familiar. One evening, an older couple came in while she was playing. They sat at a corner table, listening quietly. When the song ended, the woman came over, smiling shyly. "We've been coming here since before you were famous," she said. "We saw you that first night. You were nervous, but even then we knew you were special." Lena smiled and took her hand. "Thank you for believing in me." The woman shook her head. "Thank you for never giving up." After they left, Lena sat there for a long time just thinking. Life had come full circle. She was no longer the waitress who spilled a drink or the girl too shy to speak. She was a musician, a mentor, and a reminder that beauty can rise from the simplest places. Outside, the night rain began to fall softly, tapping against the windows. Lena rested her hands on the piano keys and smiled to herself. There was still so much to do, so many songs to write, so many people to reach, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had found her voice and with it her place in the world. She began to play one last song, a gentle, wordless tune that filled the quiet room. If anyone had walked by outside, they might have stopped for a moment, listening to the faint music through the rain. It was peaceful, full of warmth, full of life. And somewhere in that music was every step of her journey, the laughter, the tears, the sneers, the applause, and the quiet strength of a heart that refused to stop dreaming. When the last note faded, she closed her eyes and whispered softly, "Thank you." The world had listened, and she, the once forgotten waitress, had become a melody that would never fade.